Welcome. This is episode 67 of the Take Human Action PA podcast. I am pulling hosting duty tonight. This is Nick Ciesielski, and I am here with your usual host, Calvin. How's it doing?
Yeah, I'm here taking a bit of a back seat on the hosting and show prep duties tonight, and you'll see why in a minute because we got a very interesting topic to go over today.
Right. So today, what we wanted to do, something maybe a little bit different, but we wanted to do a different dive into Bitcoin here. Early January is kind of the more or less the birth of Bitcoin. We had the white paper, which came out on October 31st, 2008. And then beginning of January 2009 is where, Satoshi mined the Genesis block, first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, and kind of all started from there, leading up to today, where the initial release of the first release of the Bitcoin software was made available to the public. Tomorrow was the anniversary of the first tweet about Bitcoin, and 2 days after that, the 12th, is the date of the first transaction of Satoshi sending Hal Finney a transaction through the Bitcoin network. So we thought at this 15-year mark since the start of Bitcoin, we wanted to run back through and take a look at the white paper and have a read through that kind of Bitcoin Audible style. If anyone listens to Guy Swan here, read through this and have a discussion and see kind of the genius Satoshi had. It's not a super long document. It's about 8 pages, and then it's not super small text or anything, and margins are quite generous. So it won't take that long to get through, but it's a fairly deep document and kind of lays out, a system that's worked for 15 years. 14, I think it was around 2010. So it came out in 2009. By the end of 2010, I believe, Satoshi was gone. And it's kind of gone on without its founder ever since. So that means the community's been keeping it up and making decisions and, coordinating hundreds of thousands, millions of people on a network, agreeing on the same rules, agreeing on what the upgrade to, what updates to the system should look like. It's kind of been this massive experiment on voluntary human cooperation. It's had its ups and downs, but I think it's something worth looking at and reflecting on at this point. So, Calvin, you've never actually read it before, you said, right?
Yeah, just a couple comments on that. So, yes, I do know something about Bitcoin. We have had one episode about actually multiple episodes about cryptocurrency on the show before. We did have an episode specifically talking about Bitcoin. Besides the episode I did with you about the Bitcoin Caucus, we did have another episode on Bitcoin, and we also had an episode focused on Monero. So I do have some familiarity with cryptocurrency, but I am by no means an expert, and I've never read the white paper. So for this podcast, I'll be playing the person who has some general knowledge about computers and technology and understands the basic concept of Bitcoin, but has never read the white paper. Also, the timing of this whole thing is kind of crazy because in 2009, I think I was more than 5 years away. I was a late adopter, 5 years away from getting a smartphone, and I want to say 13 years away from being on Twitter in any form. So to talk about a tweet in 2009 is still crazy for me, even though I fall into that generation that typically uses it. It's just that was way far off for me.
Yeah, so it's crazy to think 15 years. Doesn't feel that long. I mean, it feels like, every day is kind of a thing, but so much has happened in that 15 years of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the first 4 or 5 years, just kind of this nothingness. And then it's probably around 2013 or so. Well, 2012, 2013, I think, where we really started to see some action on it. So at least that's about the time frame I initially picked up on it. So, or at least heard of it and looked into it a little bit. So,
right.
If nothing else, we can get into this. We'll run.
Yeah. Why don't you show us the tweet that you did earlier today for the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania?
I don't have that up in front of me right now.
You want me to pull it up?
Yeah, you want to pull that up?
Yeah, I can pull that up. One sec. Still not calling it X, by the way. Okay. All right. So I'll share the screen here. Okay. So we've got, at first, I didn't know what this newspaper headline was in reference to. But once I read the tweet, it made so much more sense. So do you want to say anything about the headline before we go back up to the top?
Yeah, so what we're looking at here, Israel prepares to send tanks and troops into Gaza. So this is from October. No, I'm kidding. This is January 3rd,
It could have been. That's the thing. It could have been from October.
No, this is January 3rd, 2009. The Genesis block was mined, and the headline on the front page of the Times, which is a UK newspaper, which is, I guess, the UK newspaper, one of the big UK newspapers.
Yeah, presumably it's a reference to the London Times, which I assume was the former name of the paper before they changed it.
Yeah, so the headline is Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So you've got to look at the time frame we're at here. So this is, early 2009. We're in the depths of the 2008 financial crisis. And it's saying the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the British, I guess, treasurer, is, again, about to bail out the banks with taxpayer money, government money, however you want to look at it, again. So what's important about this is that this is the headline from the newspaper the day the first Bitcoin block was mined. And Satoshi, the the genius he was, and knowing what he was at here, embedded this headline into the Genesis block of Bitcoin. So if you were to go pull up Block Explorer and look at the, dig into the hash of the first block, you would find this headline in there, because that's what Satoshi wanted everyone to know forever, what this was about. And it's about the fact that, not only is it great technology and this great, like I said, voluntary experiment and voluntary human cooperation, but it's also about these people stealing, bailing out the people, at the rich guys at the big banks, gambling with your money, and privatizing the profits. And then when they lose, well, they lose, you lose. So got to bail them out, and they can go right back to gambling it away. And the incentives that play in that system we can dive into further, but it's just kind of really gets to you where Satoshi was coming from. And I don't know if Bitcoin would be the same if it was just some experiment in how do we make something that people can exchange throughout, across the internet. There were other systems, or at least other white papers introduced previously, other ideas, and they really didn't, I guess, have a solid, say, monetary policy embedded in them. That was kind of like the abstract, well, something would come up, right? We'd come up with something on that. But like Satoshi coming into this, ensured that he aligned the incentives. He created he set the hard cap at 21 million. So you can't be debased. You can't just keep printing. Ensure that you couldn't double spend it, that every transaction is auditable and traceable throughout the ledger, and you can ensure that 21 million is 21 million. And especially with the issuance, instead of dumping it all at once or relying on some sort of centralized source to distribute the Bitcoin as it comes through, we you have the proof of work where it takes some sort of physical, not only material in the form of miners at this point, as those are highly specialized computers, but energy to produce these blocks and thus get more Bitcoin into circulation. So it's kind of a beautiful system that I think all the incentives align perfectly, and it's laid out in just these couple pages on this white paper. So
Right.
if you don't have anything else on it, Calvin, I'd like to pop in and then we can discuss.
Yeah. So anybody who hasn't read this tweet yet, it's one of the latest tweets from the Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania. Today being January 9th of 2024. That's going to take some time to set in. Check it out. We did a detailed tweet about the origins of Bitcoin and its significance. So definitely take a look at that. There's a lot of good information in here that Nick put together for us, some of which we're going to review right now. So with that, I'm good.
All right, let's get into it then. So Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Satoshi Nakamoto, Satoshi@gmx.com, bitcoin.org. Abstract. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Digital signatures provide part of the solution, but the main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required to prevent double spending. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network of timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. The longest chain not only serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed, but proof that it came from the largest pool of CPU power. As long as the majority of CPU power is controlled by nodes that are not cooperating to attack the network, they'll generate the longest chain and outpace attackers. The network itself requires minimal structure. Messages are broadcast on a best effort basis, and nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will. Accepting the longest proof of work chain is proof of what happened while they were gone.
Okay, so I have a question on that part. I've seen it all over the place, but no one's ever actually told me specifically. Is CPU just like shorthand for computer? Is there more to it than that?
Well, it's talking about, say, processing power.
Okay, so computer processing unit.
So
Something like that?
yeah, central processing unit, and then there's like, so I mean, see, I wouldn't get too hung up on it. It's basically talking about computing power on that,
Okay.
because the actual like CPU in your computer, which is what you could mine on in the day Satoshi released this,
Okay.
is no longer a thing. Then it went to the GPUs, the graphics processing units, and now
Right.
all the
Mhm.
mining is done on ASICs, application specific integrated circuits. That
Yeah.
so it's kind of one of those things that it says CPU, but we can just think about it as that, so as
Okay.
just processing power.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Makes sense.
one, introduction. Commerce on the internet has come to rely almost exclusively on financial institutions serving as trusted third parties to process electronic payments. While the system works well enough for most transactions, it still suffers from the inherent weaknesses of the trust based model. Completely non reversible transactions are not possible since financial institutions cannot avoid mediating disputes. The cost of mediation increases transaction costs, limiting the minimum practical transaction size and cutting off the possibility for small casual transactions. And there's a broader cost in the loss of ability to make non reversible payments for non reversible services. With the possibility of reversal, the need for trust spreads. Merchants must be wary of their customers, hassling them for more information than they would otherwise need. A certain percentage of fraud is accepted as unavoidable. These costs and payment uncertainties can be avoided in person by using physical currency, but no mechanism exists to make payments over communication channels without over a communications channel without a trusted party.
And so that's interesting for seeing the need from that when cancel culture wasn't so much of a thing then, and there wasn't a whole lot of doubt about transactions over the internet, because some people hadn't even learned how to do that yet, or were using that to transact on a regular basis like they are now.
Right. So continuing on, what is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party. Transactions that are computationally impractical to reverse would protect sellers from fraud, and routine escrow mechanisms could easily be implemented to protect buyers. In this paper, we propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. The system is secure as long as honest nodes collectively control more CPU power than any cooperating group of attacker nodes.
I wouldn't even think it's possible to attack the Bitcoin blocks. Like, I don't know how you would do that.
Not practically. I mean, so it relies on, and we can, we'll get into it a little bit more, but even if you have 50%, say 51 to 49, you're basically at the rates you're looking at here, the amount of computing power you put in, it's kind of almost perfectly random with who solves a block. So like, even if you're slightly less, like there's still basically a 50% chance that the honest actors get it. So in order to really like almost ensure that you're able to cheat the system, you definitely need to be like above a majority, but like you've got to be significantly above a majority to really like kind of force your way with things. Ensure that the honest actors in order to really beat out the honest actors on it. So 2, transactions. We define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. Each ownership transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner, and adding these to the end of the coin. A payee can verify the signatures that verify the chain of ownership. So we've got a little diagram here. You've got a transaction owner, one's public key, hash, owner 0 signature, verification. This is then going in this next transaction, hash, owner, private key signing. The problem, of course, is the payee can't verify that one of the owners did not double spend the coin. A common solution is to introduce a trusted central authority or mint that checks every transaction for double spending. After each transaction, the coin must be returned to the mint to issue a new coin, and only coins issued directly from the mint are trusted not to be double spent. The problem with this solution is that the fate of the entire monetary system depends on the company running the mint, with every transaction having to go through them, just like a bank. We need a way for the payee to know that the previous owners did not sign any earlier transactions. For our purposes, the earliest transaction is the one that counts, and we don't care about later attempts to double spend. The only way to confirm the absence of a transaction is to be aware of all transactions. In the mint-based model, the mint was aware of all transactions and decided which arrived first. To accomplish this without a trusted party, transactions must be publicly announced, and we need a system for participants to agree on a single history of the order in which they were received. The payee needs proof that at the time of each transaction, the majority of nodes agreed it was the first received.
All right, can we go back up to the diagram real quick?
Yeah.
So is that a diagram showing owner 1 transferring, owner 0 transferring to owner 1, and then owner 1 transferring to owner 2, etc.? Is that what it's showing?
Yeah, basically, right? So you have this transaction, and it's owner 1's public key is now included in this, and owner 0 has signed it. and then you see, you've got the public key coming in here, and then the owner one private key comes in and signs it, and then that is what allows this transaction to be made, right?
Right.
So
Because
it's
owner
not
one is entering their private key, or they entered it at some point to authorize the transaction to owner two.
right. So just a very, very basic diagram on this, but
Right.
gives a little bit. So 3
Just
times.
wait. Just so you know, sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me? My lights have been flickering because, as I told Nick earlier, I am experiencing a storm in my area. So there's a distinct chance that the power might flicker again, and it might go off entirely. So if I cut out suddenly, that's why.
All right. Continuing on this 3 timestamp server. The solution we propose begins with a timestamp server. A timestamp server works by taking a hash of the block of items. I see you flickering there.
Yeah.
To be timestamped. And
there's a bit of a delayed reaction on the computer side from when the lights go off. So if you see the lights go off and stay off, my computer is not far behind.
So a timestamp server works by taking a hash of a block of items to be timestamped and widely publishing the hash, such as in a newspaper or Usenet post. The timestamp provides the data that must have existed at the time, obviously in order to get into the hash. Each timestamp includes the previous timestamp in its hash, forming a chain, with each additional timestamp reinforcing the ones before it. So you've got a hash, block, item, hash, down the chain, hash, same thing, right? Very simple diagram on it. 4, proof of work. To implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam Back's Hashcash, rather than newspaper or Usenet posts. The proof of work involves scanning for a value that, when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of 0 bits. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing a single hash. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing a nonce in the block until a value is found that gives the block's hash the required 0 bits. Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. As later blocks are chained after it, the work to change the block would include redoing all the blocks after it.
So is the block another way of saying the ledger?
So the ledger is all the blocks, basically.
Oh, right. Okay.
So what this is basically getting at here is on each, in order to, so the transactions come in and the nodes kind of compile the transactions more or less based off of when they come in. Even though internet's fast, it's not instant. So certain transactions might come to a certain node before another node, and it's not, you'll see later on in here, it's not a huge deal. And then in order to prove in order to prove that it's a legitimate transaction, it has to run through the proof of work system here, and SHA-256 is the algorithm used. So is the hashing algorithm used, and so it's basically like the input you put in comes out with an insane output. Like if I type just a couple letters, like let's say I just type the word word, the hash would be some crazy long number that makes 0 sense. And then if I typed, let's say, the word walk, which starts with a W, it would be something completely different. Like there's no real way to figure out, and that's what's weird with it, is that there's no real way for you to sit down and figure out, like, from the output what the input's supposed to be with a hashing algorithm like SHA-256. So that's why it's talking about a nonce. So basically, part of the system here, in order to ensure that super fast computers don't come up and just run through the blockchain in in a day, a month, a year, whatever it is, and that, we keep on this cycle of having every 4 years ish for another 100 plus years. We There's a difficulty adjustment. So as more power comes onto the network, that's more guesses at this nonce. So it's basically saying that the value has to start with the value when you hash the nonce with everything else that's being hashed in the block has to come out to a value with a certain number of zeros at the start of it. And so basically all the computers are doing are randomly selecting a nonce and then this nonce number, and then guessing at it and running it through the algorithm. And that's all the miners do, are just guess and check, guess and check, guess and check until someone finally hits it. So about once every 10 minutes, someone on average is what it's planned out to be. That number is found. So you can think about all the computers in the world running this, the thousands, millions of these highly specialized computers for it, and only once every 10 minutes is a block actually found.
So this is mining, basically. This is what people.
This is how mining works. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's guess and check.
Is it fair to say that people, like if you're in a riverbed or like a mine in a mountain or something, and you're a miner and you're striking your pickaxe into like the wall, or using the sieve to shuffle through rocks in the riverbed, and you're like putting your physical work of your body into finding gold, it's semi-random, and eventually you'll get gold by doing that, but you just keep working at it until you find gold. This is the computer equivalent of it. I assume that's why someone came up with the analogy for it by calling it mining, but it's essentially the computer looking to solve this equation and using its computing power to do it, right?
Right, but instead of so let's say you start with a pickaxe and you're pounding into a wall of rock, and you get that little bit of gold. Let's say you end up with for every 10 minutes you work, you get a gram of gold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then let's say you go and you get you come up, technology advances a little bit, and you buy a big machine that tears down rocks of wall and can separate it out. In the real world, that means you're going to get gold that much quicker. In Bitcoin world, imagine you spend all that money on that equipment and you still only get that 1 gram every 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically have to use the big fancy equipment because everyone else is using the big fancy equipment. And if you don't use it, then they're going to get it all and you're not going to get any.
Yeah, buying the equipment, that's key, because if you just have a basic pickaxe, you're going to do a lot worse in terms of the amount of gold you're getting than if you have like a giant mechanical drill.
Right. So like, in the early days when Satoshi first released it, you would mine just on your computer with a CPU, and you'd solve a block. I mean, in the first couple of months, you'd probably solve a block on it, and you'd make you'd get a good solid amount of Bitcoin because the reward in those days was quite large. But then you continue on, and it's, someone goes, hey, let's use GPUs. I can run more hashes per second through a GPU. So they start using GPUs. The prices of GPUs go up, and someone goes, well, look, we're just doing this one very specific thing, which is running a SHA-256 hashing algorithm and guessing a number. We're guessing a number and then running SHA-256 and then seeing, so let's just come up with a circuit that is optimized for SHA-256 and let's just make, let's get really, really good at being as efficient with running that algorithm as possible. And that's how we ended up with ASICs, which do the large majority of mining now. Throughout the broader crypto world, more, there's at least the ones that are still mining and not proof of stake. There are other hashing algorithms. Some are what they call ASIC resistant. So it's doing something that is not as simple as just running this single algorithm. And so, they could be ASIC resistant, GPU resistant, and it might, or maybe it just, or maybe it's better on GPUs, might be better on CPUs. So like, there's weirder things, but SHA-256 is what Bitcoin has used from the start and what it will continue to use. So,
all right, let's keep going.
Okay, did we? No, we didn't read the.
No,
we read. Yeah, we just
read that paragraph. We didn't see the diagram, and we didn't see the stuff after it.
Okay, yeah. So we've got another diagram. The previous hash, a nonce, and then you've got your transactions, and then so the hash of this then becomes the previous hash here. And then you guess your nonce, and down the chain, right? That's how we get it.
Mm-hmm.
So the proof of work also solves the problem of determining representation in majority decision making. If the majority were based on one IP address, one vote, it could be subverted by anyone able to allocate many IPs. Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. The majority decision is represented by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work effort invested in it. If a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a past block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all blocks after it, and then catch up with and surpass the work of the honest nodes. We will show later that the probability of a slower attacker catching up diminishes exponentially as subsequent blocks are added. To compensate for increasing hardware speed and varying interest in running nodes over time, the proof of work difficulty is determined by a moving average targeting an average number of blocks per hour. If they're generated too fast, the difficulty increases. So this is what I was explaining with,
right.
You've got the leading zeros on the hash.
Okay, so if you've got too many miners going into the cave and they're taking all the gold out, eventually there's going to be less gold. It'll be harder to find, and it'll take you longer to find it.
Yeah, or at least well,
or you'll need more powerful tools to find it at the same rate.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing, right? Is it gets harder, so it's more like as you get so rather than saying you're removing it because you're still only you might be, if you brought a whole bunch of hash power on at one time, 1-2% of the network power just on at once, there's a good chance you're going to generate faster than that average of a block every 10 minutes. But and I can't remember how many what that moving average is, but that moving average is going to start realizing, hey, it's going too fast, increase the difficulty, and it's going to bring it back down. So it would be like if you're mining gold and you bring in all these big machines and you start mining slightly more than a gram every 10 minutes, and then it goes, nope, too much, and it gets rid of the amount of, and it makes it harder to get, versus like, well, you found too much, and so there's less because it's really targeted towards that rate of distribution.
Yeah. Okay.
5, network. The steps to run the network are as follows. 1, new transactions are broadcast to all nodes. 2, each node collects new transactions into a block. 3, each node works on finding a difficult proof of work for its block. 4, when a node finds a proof of work, it broadcasts the block to all nodes. 5, nodes accept the block only if all transactions in it are valid and not already spent. 6, nodes express their acceptance of the block by working on creating the next block in the chain, using the hash of the accepted block as the previous hash. Nodes always consider the longest chain to be the correct one and will keep working on extending it. If 2 nodes broadcast different versions of the next block simultaneously, Some nodes may receive one or the other first. In that case, they work on the first one they received, but save the other branch in case it becomes longer. The tie will be broken when the next proof of work is found and one branch becomes longer. The nodes that were working on the other branch will then switch to the longer one. So it's just a very simple principle of longest branch wins.
Mm-hmm.
New transactions do not necessarily need to reach all nodes. As long as they reach many nodes, they will get into a block before long. Block broadcasts are also tolerant of drop messages. If a node does not receive a block, it will request it when it receives the next block and realizes it missed one.
So that almost makes it sound like it has an intelligence. Like how does a node know if it receives a block or not?
Well, like it's looking to be in consensus, right? So
Okay.
when you're running a node, you're running your own copy of every transaction through the Bitcoin blockchain. So when a solved block is broadcast there and it sees that there's a transaction that's included in there that it didn't receive and having a block, then it knows, hey, switch back to this, because the whole system wants to be in consensus. And that's, it wants, everyone needs to be, but everyone needs to agree on the history of every transaction ever made, of every coin, every Bitcoin. It needs to have every, the same transaction. Everyone needs to be able to, ensure ownership of each, of everything on the network there. So if it's saying, hey, I missed something, and you're the only one saying that, then it's going to go and it's going to look and it's going to get back in consensus.
Right.
Otherwise, out of consensus, and it's no longer going to, you're going to be off doing your own thing and you're no longer on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's just that agreement on here's the rules and we agree to this history. And as long as we agree to this history and the rules, then then we're all in the same system.
Mm-hmm.
6, incentive. By convention, the first transaction in a block is a special transaction that starts a new coin owned by the creator of the block. This adds an incentive for nodes to support the network and provides a way to initially distribute coins into circulation, since there is no central authority to issue them. The steady addition of a constant amount of new coin is analogous to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. In our case, it is CPU time and electricity that is expended. The incentive can also be funded with transaction fees. If the output value of a transaction is less than its input, the difference is a transaction fee that is added to the incentive value of the block containing the transaction. Once a predetermined number of coins have entered circulation, the incentive can transition entirely to transaction fees and be completely inflation-free. The incentive may help encourage nodes to stay honest. If a greedy attacker is able to assemble more CPU power than all honest nodes, he would have to choose between using it to defraud people by stealing back his payments or using it to generate new coins. He ought to find it more profitable to play by the rules, such rules that favor him with more new coins than everyone else combined, than to undermine the system and validity of his own wealth. 7. And here's where it's going to start getting a little bit like beyond what I really know on this, but we'll give it a read through.
Okay.
7, reclaiming disk space. Once the latest transaction in a coin is buried under enough blocks, the spent transactions before it can be discarded to save disk space. To facilitate this without breaking the block's hash, the transactions are hashed in a Merkle tree. With only the root included in the block's hash, old blocks can then be compacted by stubbing off branches of the tree. The interior hashes do not need to be stored. So this is giving, I guess, what the tree looks like and then how it prunes it.
So it's like taking a tree that's gotten it's spread out too much. It's starting to get into your garden, and you need space for other plants. So you're pruning off some of the branches.
Yeah, and this is beyond stuff that I really have an inherent understanding on. I'm not a computer scientist or a cryptographer, And a
Yeah,
whole lot
I
of
mean,
this
the
comes
inherent
around to,
concept is simple enough. It's just saying they want to save space in the block, so
yeah.
they're
So,
trying to prune it.
so a block
Yeah.
header with no transactions would be about 80 bytes. If we suppose blocks are generated every 10 minutes, 80 bytes times 6 times 24 times 365 equals 4.2 megabytes per year. With computer systems typically selling with 2 gigabytes of RAM as of 2008, and Moore's Law predicting current growth of 1.2 gigabytes per year, storage should not be a problem even if block headers must be kept in memory. So
what are we at now? What's the standard computer system selling in 2024 or 2023 if we don't know that?
well, with the RAM, I don't know off the top of my head, but I mean, I don't think the amount of RAM has necessarily gotten. It might be 4 or 8 or something like that. It's not insane, but I think the overall size of the blockchain right now is around 500 gigabytes.
Hmm.
That's all transactions since the first one, because you can run your own node, and I'll talk through that in a little bit. 8. Simplified payment verification. It is possible to verify payments without running a full network node. A user only needs to keep a copy of the block headers of the longest proof of work chain, which he can get by querying network nodes until he's convinced he has the longest chain, and obtain the Merkle branch linking to the transaction to the transaction to the block it's timestamped in. He can't check the transaction for himself, but by linking it to a place in the chain, he can see that a network node has accepted it, and blocks added after it further confirm the network has accepted it. So another diagram on this. As such, the verification is reliable as long as honest nodes control the network, but it's more vulnerable if the network is overpowered by an attacker. While network nodes can verify transactions for themselves, the simplified method can be fooled by an attacker's fabricated transactions for as long as the attacker can continue to overpower the network. One strategy to protect against this would be to accept alerts from network nodes when they detect an invalid block, prompting the user's software to download the full block and alerted transactions to confirm the inconsistency. Businesses that receive frequent payments will probably still want to run their own nodes for more independent security and quicker verification.
Okay, so that raises an interesting question, because I've heard of people, accidentally giving away their private keys who don't really know what they're doing and having their wallets wiped or something along those lines, where they're essentially kind of hacked and their wallets are drained. But I've never heard of something like this actually working, where nodes have been hacked by hostile actors. Has anything like that even come close to happening?
This is to my knowledge, no. The network is held up over time, mostly because there is a whole lot of incentive to act right. Um, like it mentioned in the previous section, even if you have a ton of power and can overpower the network to reverse transactions, if you're out there reversing transactions, you've just destroyed the amount of value you have in the system, because the value the system provides is that it's supposed to be immutable, and it's supposed to be basically permanent and irreversible. And if you start stripping that away, you make it a softer and softer money. It's
Right,
not.
you're lowering the inherent value of the Bitcoin you already have or just stole.
Yeah, so there's not much of an incentive to do it. I mean, you have, I guess you could say, at some point in there, you could say, running different software, uh, that it's operating under different rules. I mean, that's basically just a hard fork. And that's kind of how you got things like Bitcoin Cash, coming out of the block size war, and anything else, right? I mean, anyone can go change the rules and fork Bitcoin from where it is on the chain now. Um, but the point is, not everyone agrees to those rules, and we've all agreed to the Bitcoin rules because, say what you want on this, Satoshi laid out a pretty good vision here, and they align the incentives to really promote honest actors and a hard money. So it really,
Yeah, that is surprising that hasn't happened. It seemed like he was very wary that might happen, but it looks like his
right. And so like,
inherent safeguards and seeming knowledge of human nature have successfully prevented that. And by the way, my lights, for those who might just be listening, my lights have flickered like 5 times in quick succession. So we'll see how this goes.
okay, combining and splitting value. 9, combining and splitting value. Although it would be possible to handle coins individually, it would make it unwieldy to make a separate transaction for every cent in a transfer. To allow the value to be split and combined, transactions contain multiple inputs and outputs. Normally, there will be either a single input from a larger previous transaction or multiple inputs combining smaller amounts, and at most 2 outputs, one for the payment and one returning the change, if any, back to the sender. It should be noted that fan out, where the transaction depends on several transactions and those transactions depend on many more, is not a problem here. There is never the need to extract a complete standalone copy of a transaction's history. So this is kind of getting into the core idea of UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs, I guess. And it's kind of saying the simple thing like, if I'm trying to buy something from you that costs $6, I hand you a $10 bill and you hand me 4 ones back. But in this case, you'd
Right.
hand me a $4 bill back, right? Because it doesn't care. It just says, all right, I had, a transaction that was sent to me that was worth 10. I'm trying to send 6 to you, so I send 10 to you and you send 4 back, is basically how this kind of goes, right? One for the payment and one for returning the change. So then it saves in the system that, hey, I had a transaction back to myself for 4 of these for 4, and there's a transaction saying you get 6. So that's the way this is kind of tracked versus like, say, a giant ledger. Well, I don't want to say ledger, but a giant list of, like, let's say every wallet address and what's and how much has been sent to that wallet address, right? Instead of that, it's the wallet. Basically, if you're running a wallet on your phone or your computer, it's basically looking to see, hey, what on here has been sent to an address that I control, versus like looking at a list that's being updated. So it's the chain is more the change more of the change in value, who has what, what's being sent where, versus like an amount of this person has this much, that person has that much, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So far, so good.
Okay. Privacy. The traditional banking model achieves a level of privacy by limiting access to information to the parties involved and the trusted third party. The necessity to announce all transactions publicly precludes this method, but privacy can still be maintained by breaking the flow of information in another place. By keeping public keys anonymous, the public can see that someone is sending an amount to someone else, but without information linking that transaction to anyone. This is similar to the level of information released by stock exchanges, where the time and size of individual trades, the tape, is made public, but without telling who the parties were. So traditional identities, transactions, third parties, counterparties, public. New privacy models, identities, transactions, public. As an additional firewall, a new key pair should be used for each transaction to keep them from being linked to a common owner. Some linking is still unavoidable with multi-input transactions, which necessarily reveal their inputs were owned by the same owner. The risk is that if the owner of a key is revealed, linking could reveal other transactions that belong to the same owner. So it's making clear that this isn't anonymous, it's pseudonymous. You can, but if you follow the proper security stuff, like creating a different key pair for every transaction, a lot of wallets do this automatically, where anytime you hit receive and receive something into it, the next time it goes to receive, it's going to receive to a different address, but it's on your user side, it's going to all look like the same thing. But from the blockchain side, if someone were to go look at the through a block explorer and look at the transaction, they're only going to see this one transaction, this amount went to there. Now it's saying when you then combine, okay, this came into here, into this address, and then we're going to combine it with these other two, because let's say, before I said I want to buy something from you for 6 and I give you a 10 and you give me a $4 bill back. Let's say I want to buy something for 10 and I have a 5, a $2 and a $3 bill. And so I hand you all of those and sign them. Then you're going to be able to see, okay, all 3 of these different addresses were sent on the same transaction, meaning that if I can trace back that $2 bill to, like, let's say a Coinbase or a service like that, a KYC exchange, I can then find out who you are if I were to be snooping through the record. So there's ways on that where you can reveal yourself. So something to keep in mind, that it's not perfectly private, especially on the base chain here. 11, calculations. We consider the scenario of an attacker trying to generate an alternate chain faster than the honest chain. Even if this is accomplished, it does not throw the system open to arbitrary changes, such as creating value out of thin air or taking money that never belonged to the attacker. Nodes are not going to accept an invalid transaction as payment, and honest nodes will never accept a block containing them. An attacker can only try to change one of his own transactions and take back the money he recently spent. The race between the honest chain and an attacker chain can be characterized as a binomial random walk. The success event is the honest chain is being extended by 1 block, increasing its lead by +1, and the failure event is the attacker's chain being extended by 1 block, reducing the gap by -1. The probability of an attacker catching up from a given deficit is analogous to a gambler's ruin problem. Suppose a gambler with unlimited credit starts at a deficit and plays potentially an infinite number of trials to try and reach break even. We can calculate the probability that he ever reaches break even, or that an attacker even catches up with the honest chain, as follows. So there's a whole equation here on this that I'm not going to run through.
Okay.
I'll show it up here on screen. But probability an honest node, probability attacker, probability. So you're just looking at these probabilities here in this stepwise function.
Right.
Given our assumption that P is greater than Q, the probability drops exponentially as the number of blocks the attacker has to catch up with increases. With the odds against him, if he doesn't make a lucky lunge forward early on, his chances become vanishingly small as he falls further behind. We now consider how long the recipient of a new transaction needs to wait before being sufficiently certain the sender can't change the transaction. We assume the sender is an attacker who wants to make the recipient believe he paid him for a while, then switch it to pay back to himself after some time has passed. The receiver will be alerted when that happens, but the sender hopes it will be too late. The receiver generates a new key pair and gives the public key to the sender shortly before signing. This prevents the sender from preparing a chain of blocks ahead of time by working on it continuously until he is lucky enough to get far enough ahead, then executing the transaction at that moment. Once the transaction is sent, the dishonest sender starts working in secret on a parallel chain containing an alternate version of his transaction. The recipient waits until the transaction has been added to a block and Z blocks have been linked to it. He doesn't know the exact amount of progress the attacker has made, but assuming the honest blocks took the average expected time per block, the attacker's potential progress will be a Poisson distribution with the expected value. So we're going to get into more equations. Lambda equals Z Q over P. To get the probability that the attacker could still catch up, we multiply the Poisson density for each amount of progress he could have made by the probability he could catch up with from that point. We're going to get into these infinite sums, converting it into C code. So all that comes into this code here. Running some results, we can see the probability drop off exponentially with Z. So Z 0 is 1, and then by the time it gets to Z equals 10, it's almost nothing, right? So
right, that's okay. So it's exceedingly low. It's
yes,
going to take even like 5 transactions. The chance is a good bit
right.
less than 1%.
Yeah, so like once you send a transaction over the chain, like, one confirmation means okay, it's there, but usually it's recommended about 6 confirmations, which on average would be about an hour. Basically makes it immutable at that point. Like if it's at that point, the amount to overcome it is just insane. So, conclusion, we have proposed a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. We started with the usual framework of coins made from digital signatures, which provides strong control of ownership, but is incomplete without a way to prevent double spending. To solve this, we proposed a peer-to-peer network using proof of work to record a public history of transactions that quickly becomes computationally impractical for an attacker to change if honest nodes control a majority of CPU power. The network is robust in its unstructured simplicity. Nodes work all at once with little coordination. They do not need to be identified since messages are not routed to any particular place and only need to be delivered on a best effort basis. Nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. They vote with their CPU power, expressing their acceptance of valid blocks by working on extending them and rejecting invalid blocks by refusing to work on them. Any needed rules and incentives can be enforced with this consensus mechanism.
Is that it?
And that's it. So we're down to the references here, right? So Wade Dye's B Money is referenced here. Adam Back's Hashcash are some of the big ones that are often cited in some of the early days here. But yeah, all these, all the cryptology, cryptographers, and just kind of, overall the paper is simple, right? Like it's a fairly simple paper. I mean, there's a little bit there that gets a little bit crazy, especially at the end. The calculations and trying to grasp some of it, but
So,
from
all right.
principle,
Just quick clarifying thing. Does that email address still work, and does that website still work?
Bitcoin.org is still good. The email address hasn't been used in who knows how long.
And that's not the guy's real name, right? Because there's no person with that name.
Well, there is a guy. So that's an interesting one, right? It's definitely a pseudonym. But in the tweet that I put out earlier, I mentioned a guy named Hal Finney, right?
Yeah.
So there's actually, and here's where like all the craziness plays into it. But one of the other guys that lived in his neighborhood was named Satoshi Nakamoto.
Huh.
And this was a guy that came out, and you can go find you can find pictures of him. He claims he's not, he claims, well, even the real Satoshi came back at one point and said, no, that's not me. Whenever this guy was getting
Harassed.
yeah, because people saw, people started like, oh, this must be the guy. Let's bother him. And that's like, I believe Satoshi actually came back and was like, no, not me. I'm
Well,
not that guy. But
what
it's
is that
interesting
guy's
because,
expertise?
um,
That guy, the author.
oh,
Like, could
not
it
in
feasibly be him?
it. There's a little bit of an overlap there. I think he was some sort of possibly software engineer or something. But I mean, we're talking, like I said, he lived near Hal Finney. We're talking Silicon Valley. So he's not so yeah, Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. Um, living in California. His birth name is Satoshi Nakamoto. Let's see. Trained as a physicist at California State Polytechnic University, he worked as a systems engineer on classified defense projects and computer engineer
Can
for
you zoom in a
technology and
bit?
financial information services companies. Nakamoto was laid off twice in the early 1990s and turned libertarian according to his daughter and encouraged her to start her own business, not under the government's thumb. In the article's seemingly biggest piece of evidence, Goodman wrote that when she asked him about Bitcoin during an brief in-person interview, Nakamoto seemed to confirm his identity as the Bitcoin's founder, stating, "I am no longer involved in that and I cannot discuss it. It's been turned over to other people. They are in charge of it. I no longer have any connection." The article's publication led to a flurry of media interest, including reporters camping out near Dorian Nakamoto's house and subsequently chasing him by car when he drove to do an interview. Later that day, the pseudonymous Nakamoto's P2P Foundation account posted its first message in 5 years stating, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto." During the subsequent full-length interview, Dorian Nakamoto denied all connection to Bitcoin, saying he had never heard of the currency before and that he had misinterpreted Goodman's question as being about his previous work for military contractors, much of which was classified. So, that was interesting. That's, you know, there is someone named that, but all the evidence says he's not. Like it says here, Hal Finney, the guy who received the first transaction from Satoshi, lived only a few blocks from Dorian Satoshi. And it looks like your power's out. So yeah, I think we've lost Calvin here on this. But I think we've more or less covered everything we really needed to in this past hour on it. Because I've never done this solo before, so we're gonna keep trying. We're gonna try and see on this, but yeah, we've kind of walked through the white paper and how it's kind of laid out where Bitcoin is now. As it says at the beginning, a peer-to-peer cash, digital cash, right? So there have been plenty of ups and downs in the history there that we can get into further as things go on, further, such as the block size issue, or even older, like sort of Mount Gox, which is kind of the first real big hack in my mind. Is the story is kind of that Mount Gox story and how many people kind of got rug pulled on that, and then we moved into sort of the modern day as it got into the block size wars, and then into now where we have the Lightning Network, and there's other second, third layer solutions such as Adam Back, whose Hashcash was cited there. His companies has Liquid Bitcoin, which is another second layer solution. There's a solution called ARC, which I think eliminates a lot of the inbound liquidity issues that are discussed as being sort of counterintuitive and difficult to grasp with the current setup of the Lightning Network. Things such as federated mints, which I just caught a tweet today talking, that was posting an old Hal Finney post about sort of his vision on basically banking on Bitcoin, which would look sort of like a complete free banking model with different different mints basically kind of issuing their own sort of electronic cash based on with Bitcoin sort of as the underlying asset that connects all the different ones in the network together. And this vision is kind of being already implemented through a group called Fediment, where you kind of put Bitcoin in, they call it kind of second party custody instead of third party, where it's with someone else. It's kind of like supposed to be closer in people, people you actually know and trust, who have little incentive to rug pull you. And there's other security that goes with it, but to help ensure. But basically, like, it's kind of you exchanging value within your own little group as much as you can, and then when it has to transmit across, it's using this, they call it eCash within it. So within your little group, it's eCash, and then as it goes to the next, it's kind of that group's eCash, and each of these groups would be able to set their own sort of policy, whether it would be like a fractional reserve or fully banked. And I would assume the incentives push towards full reserve, but the market will tell on that one. But with the limitation on block size, and blocks being very full as they are, through especially things like right now with the ordinals and inscriptions and people trying to write pictures to the Bitcoin blockchain for the fun of it, you're going to run in Lightning. The mathematics of onboarding everyone individually into Lightning is not there, and you kind of need to be able to come back to the main chain, I think, in order to be completely secure and kind of control. So it's interesting how much within the rules that exist you can continue to kind of soft fork and build up better rules that improve the consistency of the system, the consistency, the reliability, and the amount of transactions on the system. While hard forking is probably not going to happen, or at least it's not supposed to, because it requires a consensus of everyone. The soft forks do happen, SegWit, or most recently Taproot. Those are rules that are basically voluntarily adopted, and a lot of you don't have to necessarily be running those to be interacting with the network, although a lot of times it does improve your ability to, either lower transaction fees or different types of different things. Makes the system more efficient. So I don't think a whole lot of places have even fully implemented all of Taproot, which was the last soft fork. So there's a whole huge rabbit hole to go off on that. But we can sit here for hours talking about this, but I think we've covered what we wanted to. We've gone through we've given a whole reading of the Bitcoin white paper. You kind of sit back and reflect that, hey, this little 8-page document has now been providing us an actual experiment for 15 years, and this year is a halving year, so the block rewards are cut down sometime this spring, April-May timeframe, I believe. So we are guaranteed to have at least an interesting year with that, with these Bitcoin ETFs almost coming imminently, I would suspect at this point. It's going to be wild, and I want to keep looking at this and seeing where this world leads us, because I think it's one of the most practical things we can do, and most practical and simplest things we can do is buy and transact in Bitcoin. And maybe we can continue on about practical methods on this. I'm in the process of figuring out if we can get a breakout session at the national convention in DC this year. Get a room breakout session to maybe do some practical learning on how to properly self-custody and use Bitcoin. So if that's something that might interest you, keep an eye out. But yeah, for anyone watching who's not following, you can follow the Bitcoin Caucus at Bitcoin Caucus on Twitter, bitcoincaucus.com. The website's still not up, but you can put your name and get on our list. And as we begin to grow this, be in contact with us on that. We have a Discord. The link to it is in the link tree on the Twitter bio. So that's all I've got. I think this was a great episode, and we've it's been an interesting 15 years. I'm sure it's only going to get more interesting. I hope Calvin's good out there with his storm. It's windy and a little bit of a storm going on here, but it doesn't sound quite as bad as what he's got going on out there. So from all of us here at the Take Human Action PA podcast, have a good night.